Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. We're in the company of Christopher Dickey of The Daily Beast. We're also with David Chazan of The Daily Telegraph, Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amr Abed Rabo, who graces us with his presence because now you're dividing your time between here in Beirut.
Exactly.
And also with us, Moroccan freelance reporter Aida Alami. Welcome back to all of you. Aida was mentioning before the breaks how Europe's values are being put to the test by this migrant crisis. The same can be said of France's values, put to the test by those recent terror attacks. So says Christiane Taubira, who this week resigned as Justice Minister, the outspoken former presidential candidate who had become a magnet of fury for the hard right when she sponsored France's gay marriage bill, had crossed swords with the current socialist prime minister over plans to strip dual citizens of their French nationality.
The terrorist danger that threatens us is serious, unpredictable, and we've learned to track it down. We've given ourselves the means to do so. We know how to fight it, and we've shown that we're determined to bring it down. But I don't think we should hand it any victories, whether it's military, diplomatic, political, or symbolic.
Christopher Dickey, is France compromising its values when it goes on its high horse about stripping dual nationals of their citizenship?
Well, I think, yes, to some extent, but what I think Taubira is also saying is that it's a policy that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for François Hollande to do it, for a socialist government to do it. It doesn't make any sense for France to do it. What's the idea? You strip away French nationality from somebody who has, say, French and Algerian nationality. How is that supposed to deter terrorists? What is that supposed to do? These are people who are likely to blow themselves up. They're going to say, oh, my God, I'm going to lose my French passport. That's just horrible.
I won't be able to vote anymore.
So I won't be able to vote anymore. And the explanations that are offered for that are insane. That, for instance, somebody actually put forward the idea that it's a kind of political death. We don't have the death penalty, so this is the next best thing, taking away French citizenship. Well, that's a wonderful romantic idea for some people, but has nothing to do with the way terrorists think. I think Taubira had a lot of issues with this government, and some of them were maybe rational and some were not. But this, she was absolutely right. There is no reason for this government to support this déchéance de nationalité.
But the funny thing is that the Prime Minister has said he's removed all reference to dual nationals from the bill. So this could apply to anyone. So you could argue that
but France is signatory.
Exactly. Well, if you're a dual national terrorist and you lose your French nationality, you've still got another nationality to fall back on. If you're a French terrorist, hey,
and also the historical resonance of this is extremely painful for anybody who has any historical sense. I mean, for instance, the Vichy government denationalized a lot of people, including Charles de Gaulle.
Exactly.
So what are we talking about here? Where did this idea come from? It came from Marine Le Pen. It came from the far right. What on earth is François Hollande, or for that matter, Manuel Valls? Do they think they're going to get Le Pen's voters?
Well, they have got three-quarters of French voters supporting this bill.
They're following the polls, basically.
Yeah,
Which is a terrible idea.
Those voters will support François Hollande.
Not at all.
I mean, he is so screwed.
Yeah.
There's no
They've
prayer.
extended the bill to perpetrators of crimes, so it's not just terrorism anymore. So it's like a vague wording that's kind of...
But it was about more than the bill, wasn't it? Taubira, I think, was, you know, perhaps rightly concerned about the way Muslims and possibly other minorities were being singled out. You know, more than 3,000 premises have been searched since the November 13 attacks. Only a few more than 200 weapons have been seized.
You know,
almost all of those premises were either owned or connected to Muslims. So maybe French Muslims quite rightly feel, you know, a small minority.
Exactly. And what you absolutely do not want to do under the current circumstances is divide the country further.
Exactly.
Alienate people more.
Yeah.
I was talking to Gilles Kepel, who's a scholar of Islam and Islamic groups. And after the November 13th attacks, he and people he worked with were interviewing people, jihadists in jail, who were against the November 13th attacks, said this is absolutely not Islam, this is not targeting innocents sitting in cafes, this is insane, we shouldn't have done this. You had this moment when even jihadists were turned against that kind of craziness. And the next thing that Valls and Hollande do is come up with this stripping away of nationality, which basically, as you say, who's going to get stripped? It's not going to be
What
people
is
who aren't Arab.
What's terrible is that we all agree, even obviously the jihadist Gilles Kepel, they all agree that the values of France or of Europe are attacked, and the best thing, let's say, we would reply is to strip ourselves from some values. Instead of having more values and strengthening them more, we divide.
The best reply is unity.
Exactly,
not divisiveness.
Reactions coming in. This one from Gabriel. The world needs more like Taubira, people who behave ethically, not cravenly, who will give up power, not cave to fear, sticking to her principles, refusing to endorse a police state. But of course, there's a second problem. We showed you earlier that image of her bidding adieu to her ministry staff on her bicycle as she rode out of the Justice Ministry. Well, it made the front page of paper of record Le Monde with the headline, Hollande loses his left. Amar Abed Rabo, how's this going to play out now?
I don't know for Hollande, but don't ask me about Christiane Taubira. I'm a real fan. I was I was even standing next to the ministry when she left, and it was an amazing moment of on her bike, in a very romantic Parisian way. I've had all the comments of people, I mean, maybe Aida had the same from the Arab world, who were amazed that a minister leaves office on a bike, because we all know ministers,
they have 10 cars.
They have many Mercedes and Jaguars, or I don't know what kind of cars. So for Hollande, I don't know. It's I'm very shocked, and I'm someone who voted for Hollande. I'm very shocked in the last 2 or 3 months. I mean, another sentence, maybe you spoke about it here last week, but another sentence was terrible from Manuel Valls when he said something like, you can't explain, because if you explain, you excuse terrorism, or something like that. And I think if we begin to give up explaining or give up understanding or looking at things, then we lose everything. So that's, I think for Hollande, that's a major issue.
Sarkozy did the same thing in 2011 in Grenoble, where he started talking about stripping away French nationality. What was the effect of that? He moved the center-right party to the right of Marine Le Pen and opened the way for her to start presenting herself as a reasonable candidate. Now Hollande and Valls do the same thing. It's just extraordinary.
Fighting terrorism, a mantra often repeated by Iran's president during an historic visit to Paris. The major deals that were announced followed the start of sanctions relief a little under 2 weeks ago. They enabled Hassan Rouhani to state that jobs and growth are the best weapons against extremism, a mantra repeated at the presidential palace.
There's one point that both sides supported strongly today, and that is the fight against fanaticism, terrorism, and extremism. We must remain extremely vigilant and active in this area, exchanging intelligence between our two countries, exchanging policies, and in other areas as well, particularly in the field of culture, so that we may continue working against the very root of terrorism and return to a situation of security for all of our peoples.
Exchange intelligence, exchange our two great cultures. Seems to be a dig there, David Chazan, at Saudi Arabia.
Well, clearly there's a big split in the Middle East between the mainly Shiite countries like Iran and the Sunni countries like Saudi Arabia over Syria, because Iran is...
And here Rouhani seems to be making the case, hey, we're the ones fighting ISIS.
Yeah, well, this is what he said to Hollande, and Hollande's response was to say terrorism is the sole enemy, because Rouhani also said we shouldn't be too focused on any one person, which was an obvious reference to the French insistence and the general Western demand that Assad quit power for there to be some sort of peaceful settlement. And that's just rejected by Iran. They want Assad to stay, but they're not particularly happy about the so-called Islamic State either. And they probably feel that in the past, IS have received funding from Saudi Arabia, not officially, but from people in Saudi Arabia. So, you know, this is a big split. But on the other hand, I suppose you make your alliances where you can find them. We've got a serious problem in Syria and Iraq with terrorism. And so Iran could be the key to helping us attack the so-called Islamic State more effectively. Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know if I should say you're very optimistic or I don't know. I mean, if Iran, that has been for, what, now 30 years, let's say the main destabilizer, how should I put that in English? Destabilizer in the area with the support, I mean, with a tool like Hezbollah, who's been doing what we know in Lebanon, with Syria, with the support to Bashar al-Assad, with Iraq, I mean, we could spend the night counting and naming problems. So suddenly we decide that now there would be a factor of peace or a factor of stabilization or something like that. This is either a joke or dishonesty. You know, it's not something else.
Well, maybe the main point about the visit was that billions of dollars of contracts.
That is the problem. Yeah, that's the problem. Now we talk. Now we talk. But what is terrible is when I look at the images at Rouhani at the Élysée and the signing of the contracts, I really remember Sarkozy with Gaddafi. It was very similar. We were talking about Airbus. We were talking about nuclear. We were talking about many, I mean, civil nuclear, of course, civilian. And it's almost the same images and the same protest in the street and the same ministers or people saying we're a bit uncomfortable with it.
Sarkozy and Assad at one point, too.
And Sarkozy and Assad, of course, yeah. So it seems like this is endless. I mean, it's we keep talking about values.
So what do you do? Do you isolate a nation of 80 million forever, or
I'm
do you do business?
I'm not in charge, so don't ask me. But I'm just noting what's happening.
I think what you're arguing for is realism in dealing with Iran. I mean, first of all, ask yourself: does Iran really have an interest in ending the war in Syria? One of the big problems with the war in Syria is that the major players behind the proxies have no particular interest in ending the war. Saudi Arabia doesn't have any particular interest in ending the war. Those Syrian refugees, they're not going to Saudi Arabia, and they're not going to Iran. As long as they can fight their proxy war in their proxy state, then they will keep it going, as ISIS in Lebanon learned over the course
ISIS
of 15
legitimately
years.
is a problem for Iran. Just as in the same way as what happened in Afghanistan was a problem for Iran.
Well, up to a point, but ISIS is a problem in Iraq for Iran because it's challenging the government in Iraq, and Iran does, now that it's got Iraq, so to speak, doesn't want to lose Iraq. So that's a real problem. But then again, look at the way Iran manages these things. Look at the way the Shia militias operate in Iraq. In Diyala province, for instance, which was cleared of a lot of ISIS forces, no Sunnis are going back to those provinces. No Sunnis are being allowed back, or if they go back, that's in peril of their own lives. So it's a horrible, horrible situation, and one that Iran's forces have made worse again and again and again. You look at Uncle Rouhani there, and he looks so nice. He's so avuncular. He's sort of Santa Claus in a turban, right? But the guys who are really running the show on the ground in Iraq and Syria, those are the Quds Force guys. Those are Soleimani and those people, and those are not Rouhani's people.
Many people saying that it's going to be until we have elections at the end of next month inside of Iran, that everything's still up in the air.
Well, I have to disagree with the Gaddafi comparison, because Gaddafi and Sarkozy had a lot of obscure money dealings that we still don't know much about. But I think diplomacy is not about talking about people you like, it's talking about people you disagree with. And I actually think France is a little bit too extreme about Iran when you see that they're more hardliners than the US right now. And I don't really understand what the Hollande administration is trying to accomplish, with actually many topics right now with this administration.
Yes, we scratch our heads a lot.
Yeah, it's the elections might change everything, of course.
All right, we'll continue to follow it. Finally, at first glance, it can seem like an uncomfortable choice between airbrushing history and glorifying tyrants. undergraduate students at Oxford University had campaigned for the removal of a statue of Cecil Rhodes. He founded what's current-day Zimbabwe and Zambia, had his two Rhodesias run by his diamond and mining company. There were thousands slaughtered on his watch, his name associated with the worst of British colonial imperialism. But the university has now ruled that it's no reason to take down his statue. Chris Patton, the chancellor of the university, saying that if people at the university are not prepared to demonstrate the sort of generosity of spirit which Nelson Mandela showed towards Rhodes and towards histories, if they're not prepared to embrace those issues, maybe they should think about being educated elsewhere. David Chazan, do you agree with Chris Patton?
Well, you know, there are two sides to this story, really, and I can see the logic to both of them. There's the argument that this was a bad man, particularly for Africans or anybody with some kind of African heritage in Britain or in other countries. Looking back at this, it's a bit like having a Nazi, isn't it? A statue of a Nazi in a university in Berlin. Would that be allowed? On the other hand, historically, Cecil Rhodes attended Oriel College and funded a lot of things, including the famous Rhodes Scholarships, which enabled Bill Clinton, Chris Christopherson, Wesley Clark to come to Oxford, to name but three. And so I suppose the argument of the current Vice-Chancellor is that the statue should remain, but it should be placed in historical context because you can't just airbrush history. But I do note in passing, a little bit like the Iran visit, that when this controversy blew up, alumni of Oriel College were threatening to reduce their funding of the college by a third. So contributions would have fallen from £3 million to £2 million.
So you think that weighed on the decision of Oxford?
Am I suggesting that? I mean, you might think so, but I couldn't possibly comment.
All right, somebody who does agree with Oxford is on Twitter here. He says, should we destroy all statues, monuments, etc., that represent Rome, Persia, Assyria, etc., for the sake of now? These statues should stay in place not as a remembrance of glory, but as a reminder of our historic ignorance. Amar Abed-Rabba?
The problem is not the statue itself, I guess, it's the place. I mean, Oxford as a place of light and of knowledge and of generosity, etc. So yes, for me it is a problem. And as David said, I mean, it reminds me also of what's happening with Iran, values versus money. The guy used to fund... or after he died, he left a lot of money.
Iran made news this week when they covered up. The Italians decided to cover up statues. So do you hide the past? In other
exactly. Words? I mean, do you hide the past? Do you hide your values because someone comes with a big checkbook? Or I mean,
well, but
these are real
the argument
issues.
is that because of your values, you should hide the past. You should erase the history. I mean, it's exactly the same debate that we're having in the United States about statues of Confederate war heroes during the American Civil War, or the battle flag of Northern Virginia flying all over the Confederate flag, flying all over the southern states. You know, do you erase history, or do you look the history, literally look it in the face in the form of these statues and say, we're making new history now, let's move on. The idea that you should do that by just doing away with Woodrow Wilson at Princeton or doing away with Confederate generals in the South, I think that's not a very healthy idea. I think it's better to keep that history around and keep people talking about it.
And where would it stop? I mean, Winston Churchill, the great wartime hero of Britain, made some very racist remarks about Hindus, which would by no means be acceptable today.
And put down a rebellion in Kenya.
Yeah. So, you know, do you have to reassess everybody's record like that, or should you just look at it in context?
Reassess it as history, but
say,
not by erasing monuments.
Well, yeah. I think so.
One final point on this. Let me ask you, as the one who's most recently graduated from an institution of higher learning here, this has sparked another debate, which is that there's less room for debate on university campuses today than there used to be. All this talk of safe spaces and the like, that there's more sort of politically correct intolerance, or people don't want there to be anything that offends anybody?
I don't know. That's true. I don't know what you all think. No, I don't think so. I think, I don't know, I don't see much change, to be honest. I think this is a healthy debate that students are having at Oxford, and I think that shows that these kinds of student movements still continue.
I think it's interesting. I mean, the rest of us here, we're all old enough to remember when it was perfectly acceptable to make homophobic or, slightly off-color racist remarks, and you could more or less get away with it. Nowadays, you can't because of what we call political correctness. Well, in general, most people would say that's an advance. We've become more enlightened and more tolerant and less accepting of just prejudice and bigotry.
Unless you're Donald Trump, actually.
Well, unless you're Donald Trump, yeah. But then at what point does political correctness itself become a little bit tyrannical?
Well, that was the issue. That's the issue on the campuses. All of a sudden, political correctness makes it an issue if people are protesting. A guy wants to take photographs of the protest, and all of a sudden he's getting beaten up because because it's a safe space. What?
Yeah.
It's a crazy situation, but we live in a crazy world. This is not one of the great dangers we face, I think.
All right. Christopher Dickey, I want to thank you. I want to thank Amar Abed, Rabo, Aida Alami, and David Shazan. Stay with us, though. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James. Emma, we've been talking about Donald Trump sucking all the oxygen in the room, but you have the answer. You're going to talk to us about Bernie Sanders instead.
Well, yes, but it's not all good news for Bernie Sanders. Despite the fact that he's really viewed as rather an avuncular, cuddly, kind of idealistic candidate, a lot of his supporters, or some of his supporters, I should say, don't fall into the same kind of category, and they're coming in for a lot of criticism, and it isn't helping his campaign. Now, if we take a look at this tweet, which was actually sent out earlier this week by his Rapid Response Director, which is a marvellous job title, Mike Kaska, if you support Bernie Sanders, please follow the senator's lead and be respectful when people disagree with you. Now, this came...
There must be a context there.
There is well, the context is huge because basically there are all these accusations of bullying being made against what are known as the Bros or the Bernie Bros, a specific group of his supporters, primarily young men who spend too much time on social media. And Mashable has been looking at this particular problem and says they've basically become a sexist mob. And what it is that basically particularly women in high-profile jobs, such as journalists, who comment about Hillary Clinton, then receive all these hateful messages, really strong backlash against whatever they've had to say. Now, Mashable has spoken to a chief of staff for a Democratic member of Congress who has endorsed Clinton. She says about the Bernie Bros, they are a mob, and it's not positive toward their candidate. It's just trying to tear you down from supporting Hillary. Now, Mashable asks, will it hurt Bernie's chances? Well, we'll have to wait until February the 1st, really, to find that out. Now, I did have a quick look on Reddit, where there is a Sanders for President group with 160,000 people involved in the conversation here. And I looked at quite a few different things that maybe might have set off this kind of smaller group of supporters who don't have the nicest of attitudes. And I have to say that I didn't find anything that I thought was offensive there. But if we take a look at this Facebook page, which is a Bernie Sanders social network page, not endorsed by him, I hasten to add, it's just his followers. A writer for Jezebel, the magazine, actually posted a couple of messages on these Facebook pages to see whether she got a response. And this one, as you can see, the post has now been removed because of the kind of content that was there. Now, what she's done in her article on Jezebel is detailed what was said. None of it I can repeat here for obvious reasons. Lots of swear words, including they've actually made up their own curse words specifically aimed at insulting women in particular. So
it's basically cyberbullying on a grand scale.
Cyberbullying, and not something that Bernie Sanders is going to want to have his name attached to.
Another story that you've been following for us is the makeover of the Barbie doll.
Indeed, it's about time. At 57, it's a little late for a midlife crisis, but Mattel, which makes Barbie, has decided that basically there's been quite a dip in sales, and they decided to modernise her, make her a little more inclusive. And so, as this Twitter user puts it, after nearly 6 decades, real little girls can finally buy a Barbie that looks like real girls. Hashtag progress. And you can see they're very different to the traditional Barbie that we've seen over the years, the sort of stick-thin blonde with improbable proportions. There is a lot of support out there for Barbie. The child in me is excited, the adult in me is proud. Queen Latifah herself, a woman of very impressive curves, I have to say, says, "I'm loving that Barbie added 3 new body types to the line. They are curvy, petite and tall." However, Barbie tweeted about it herself, "The doll evolves, what a powerful moment, and this is just the beginning," including a link to an article in Time magazine. But this article isn't particularly praiseworthy, I suppose, for Barbie. What this writer, Jill Filipovich, actually says is that Barbie's problem is far beyond skin deep. One pointy-toed step forward is hardly a giant leap for womankind. Barbie is literally an objectified woman, not a superhero or an action figure, but a plastic lady notable because she is pretty.
Oh dear. Many thanks, Emma James. Something we'll have to...
No, I'm sure she has great sense of humor.
I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.